Out of the 3 15 markers I completed across my 3 A-Level Economics papers, I managed to achieve full marks in 2 out of 3 of them. This video will go through those 15 out of 15 responses so you can see exactly what one looks like. For full disclosure, here are the marking sheets for my actual 2022 A-Level exams, and as you can see, in paper 1 I got 15 out of 15 in this 15 marker, and in paper 3 I got 15 out of 15 in this 15 marker. For those of you wondering about paper 2, I only managed to achieve 13 out of 15 in this response, so I won't show you that one today. You've also probably noticed that my handwriting in these responses is pretty shocking, and in all honesty, I'm pretty impressed that the examiner could read it and still mark it pretty well. But because it's so bad and most of you won't be able to read it, what I'll do is read aloud these responses. So let's get straight into it with the first 15 marker. So this here is the 15 marker I chose to respond to in paper 1, microeconomics. It reads, explain the main causes of inequality in the distribution of pre-tax incomes. Now the first thing to note is in this response, I actually don't do an introduction. For some 15 markers, I've just found it difficult to give a good, thorough introduction that wasn't just a waste of space, a waste of words, and a waste of time. So for this case, I really couldn't think of anything worthwhile saying in the introduction, so I just dove straight in with the first point.
The first main reason of inequality in the distribution of pre-tax incomes is wage differentials. Wage differentials refer to different individuals in different industries earning different wages. Wage differentials can arise as a result of individuals having different MRPs, brackets, marginal revenue products. This can be due to a multitude of factors, for instance, different levels of skill, different levels of education, different levels of experience, etc. As the demand for labour comes from an individual MRP, those with higher levels of skill, experience and education are demanded more and in turn receive higher wages. For instance, becoming a heart surgeon requires greater levels of skill and education than becoming a cleaner. Hence, the MRP of a surgeon is greater than that of a cleaner, hence the surgeon is demanded significantly more and receives a higher wage. This is one cause of inequality in the distribution of pre-tax incomes.
Now this is a pretty basic point to start my 15 marker off. But even though it's basic, it's still good knowledge, application and analysis. As you can see, I've tried to develop the point as much as I physically can. I've talked about wage differentials occurring due to different MRPs, and then I've given some examples of why this may occur. As a side note, I found using examples a really good way to boost your 15 marker responses. I've then gone on to introduce economic theory and really analyse as much as I possibly could. Now I kind of rounded this paragraph off with a useless sentence, but in my mind it was just nice to know I'd finished off one point, hence why I probably said it in the exam. Now moving on to the second paragraph.
The second main cause of inequality in the distribution of pre-tax incomes is labour market discrimination. Figure 1 shows an example of labour market discrimination. The employer, who holds the prejudice, believes the MRP of one group to be greater than the MRP of another group. In this instance, they believe the MRP of men to be greater than the MRP of women. This therefore leads to them demanding more male employees than female employees and paying men a higher wage than women. Seen on figure 1 by the fact that WM is greater than WW and QM is greater than QW. This would also cause inequality in the distribution of pre-tax incomes.
Again, in this point, I've used a big example and centered a lot of my analysis and application around that example. And hopefully, as you can see, I've tried to explain everything really thoroughly. For example, I haven't just gone, well, if there's discrimination in the labour market, the employer may prefer men to women and hence employ more men and employ less women. Instead, I've talked about deeply what this does in terms of MRP and hence demand curves, and hence going to talk about the level of employment as well as the wage. You can see I've really tried to analyse as much as possible to truly explain this point. Again, for some reason, I've rounded off this paragraph with a useless sentence, but there's nothing wrong with doing so, I guess. It just doesn't really add anything at all to my answer. So now moving on to the third paragraph.
Thirdly, age could be a potential cause of inequality in the distribution of pre-tax income. The first reason for this is due to older individuals having been in the labour market for a longer duration of time, hence they have developed more skills and experience in their respective industry. As a result, it would be expected that they have a greater MRP than younger individuals. As a result, they are more likely to receive a higher wage rate, leading to inequality in the distribution of pre-tax income. Moreover, it may be possible that younger individuals are negatively discriminated against, and hence the perceived MRP of older individuals is greater than it actually is in reality. Hence, meaning the wage rate of older individuals is greater, leading to further pre-tax income inequality.
Now, looking back and reading this third point, it's kind of just a combination of my first 2 points, if you notice. So I'm talking about how old people may have different MRPs, which is basically what my first point is about with wage differentials. I've then gone on to talk about how there may be discrimination against younger people, which is essentially what my second point is. So really, this third point doesn't really add too much to my essay, I don't think. But the reason I probably included it is because in my 15 markers, I always wanted to do at least 3 points. Now, although as I said, I don't think this point really is that great, at least not compared to the first 2 points, it's still good knowledge, application and analysis, which are the things you're looking for in these 15 markers. And as you can see, I just finished it off there. I didn't do any concluding statements, any summaries, or anything like that. My whole 15 marker was literally just 3 separate points answering the question. And that just shows you don't actually need an introduction or conclusion in these 15 markers to still achieve full marks. In terms of what the examiner said about my response, it reads like this. They said, valid issues with sound knowledge, good application of economic concepts, and clear logical chains of reasoning. Now that really just sums up what a 15 marker should be. You want sound knowledge, good applications of economic concepts, and really clear, thorough explanations and analysis. So you might look at this and think, well, that's very simple, very easy, I can write that. And it's true, you can. The key here is just not to overcomplicate it and just analyse as deeply as you possibly can. So that was the first 15 marker that I got full marks on, and here's the second one. As you can see on the screen now, the question reads, explain the factors that a commercial aircraft manufacturer, such as Boeing or Airbus, should consider when forecasting the future sales of its aircraft. Now, in all honesty, when I saw this question in the exam, I really didn't like it too much. I hadn't focused much of my revision about forecasting of sales in the future and things like this, so I thought this 15 marker would be pretty difficult to answer. But luckily, as my revision was quite broad and I had good knowledge of similar concepts which could be related to things such as sales, I was okay in the end. So here is my response, and again you can see I don't do an introduction to this 15 marker either. And this is for the exact same reason I said for the first 15 marker, it's not necessary if you don't want to do one. All I do is go straight in with the first factor.
The first factor that commercial aircraft manufacturers should consider when forecasting the future sales of its aircraft is the rise in population, more specifically the rise in the middle class population. This is because air travel is a luxury good, which is thus usually utilised by upper and middle class households compared to working class households. Thus, there is likely to be correlation between the demand for air travel, brackets, and thus in turn aircraft due to drive demand, close brackets, and the population of middle class families/households. Thus, commercial aircraft manufacturers should consider indicators including the rate of growth of GDP per capita, shifts in demand and supply for middle class jobs, e.g. law, finance, etc. Extract C states that the middle class population is expected to rise from 3.9 billion to 5.9 billion over the next 20 years, which thus would be a major factor when forecasting the future sales of aircrafts.
Now again, this is just a very simple point, but as you can hopefully see, I've just tried to explain it very thoroughly. So I talked about rising population, and specifically a rising population of the middle class. Now the examiner maybe wasn't convinced that I'd explained it fully enough, as you can see when they went why with a question mark, but I thought I did a pretty good job saying it was middle class people that would use these services because they're luxury goods, and hence we're looking at if their population increases. Maybe I could have explained it better though. So now moving on to my second paragraph.
The second factor that commercial aircraft manufacturers should consider is the level of both consumer and producer/business confidence around the world. For instance, when business confidence increases, firms around the world are more likely to resume spending and investing, as they are assured about what the future state of the economy holds. This is thus, in turn, likely to see an increase in the demand for raw materials and capital, for businesses to import so they can invest and expand. Increased demand for such factors of production, e.g. land and capital, would also lead to increased demand for aircraft, as it is likely to be derived demand for aircraft, i.e. the demand, bracket, and hence sales, of the aircraft would come from demand for imported goods and services. This is because aircrafts may be used to transport such goods and services. The same principle applies for consumer confidence. When consumer confidence increases, e.g. as economies are emerging from recession, their marginal propensity to consume is likely to increase. Some of the increase wanting to consume will come through demanding goods/services which are produced abroad, and thus the need for air travel to transport such goods. This is supported by the fact that Extract C states that the expected annual average growth of air cargo market will be around 4%.
Now hopefully, as you can see, the analysis and explanations in this paragraph is much more detailed and hopefully much deeper than the first paragraph. And that's maybe because I talked about 2 separate points here, business confidence and consumer confidence. But again, I've been really careful to try and explain every single step of my reasoning. You'll see the examiner liked this, as I said, well-developed analysis. And getting this well-developed analysis, this good deep analysis, is really the key to be hitting those 15 out of 15 responses. So next, moving on to my third paragraph, which discusses the third factor.
The third factor that commercial aircraft manufacturers should consider is the growth of international trade. This is particularly prominent in the present day, due to the rise of globalization leading to a more integrated and interconnected world economy. Thus, this is likely to mean a reduction in protectionism, as well as an increase in the volume of exports and imports being transferred around the world. As international trade increases, the need and hence sales of commercial aircrafts would 2 increase. This is because aircrafts can be used to transfer goods, as they have the advantage of usually being faster and more direct compared to other methods of transportation.
Now, I can actually remember at this point in the exam, after I'd done my first 2 points, I was really struggling to think of more points. As you can see, this third paragraph is pretty similar to what the second paragraph is all about. The examiner even notes this when they say similar to previous point. But as you can see from the annotations, there's still good analysis in this paragraph, which is still pushing me up those grades, pushing me towards that 15 out of 15. And for this particular 15 marker, I did 4 points, probably because I was panicking and my third point really wasn't that great.
Finally, the fourth factor that should be considered is supply and demand of aircrafts. For instance, if a new, more efficient production process for the aircrafts is discovered, this would reduce the cost of producing such aircrafts, thus in turn would lead to an increase in the supply of the aircrafts, leading to increased sales at a lower price. Alternatively, Extract C states newer planes are more efficient and environmentally friendly. For instance, Airbus A321XLR has 30% lower fuel consumption per seat compared to previous generation competitor aeroplanes. Thus, these planes are likely to be demanded more, leading to increased quantity demanded and in turn increased sales of such planes.
And again, this fourth point is pretty small and definitely not as good as the second point or even the first point. That being said, it's still good application, knowledge and analysis that I'm adding to my response. Now, the examiner for this question didn't leave a comment like they did for the one before, but hopefully it was something similar. As evidenced in this particular response, it's nowhere near perfect. Some of my points are quite weak and not that well justified, but it's good enough, and that's the key for these responses. Again, you're probably looking at this thinking, I can do the same, I can do something better, and it's true. The key is though, being really deep, really thorough, and explaining every single step of your reasoning and explanations. Hopefully you found this video useful. Hopefully you now know what a 15 out of 15 response looks like. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments, and I'll see you soon.